Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you on the debut broadcast of the Schaftlein Report. We will be bringing you inside information about what's going on in politics, and in this edition, our start, boy, we couldn't have picked a better topic. We've just had the presidential election, currently marred in controversy in roughly 6 states, and so we'll be giving you in-depth knowledge about what's really happened, the true story, things that you may not always hear on the mainstream media, and we will be providing that information Monday through Thursday, and with the election up, we will be doing it tomorrow also. So welcome aboard. It's going to be a fun ride, and we're happy to have you with us today. I would like to make an introduction. Today I have as my guest Mr. Gary Demar. Gary is an author, graduated from Western Michigan University, and he's originally from the hotbed of the controversy, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Gary has a background with Reformed Theological Seminary. He's authored 35 books, and he's been a frequent guest on cable news stations and various newspaper interviews and television stations over the year. And Gary, I'd like to welcome you to the initial broadcast of the Schaftlein Report.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope I can meet some expectations, especially on your debut program.
You know, that's really good to have you, Gary. And why don't we just start out? I mean, let's get our audience up to speed, really, on where we are in this election recount. I mean, First, we had the debacle with Fox News calling Arizona way prematurely. So let's bring you up to speed on each of the various states, and let's talk about where we are as of right now in real-time data. The state of Arizona is first and foremost center number one. You know, people can say we got problems in Pennsylvania, we got some issues in Georgia, we have issues elsewhere. But we really have to focus on Arizona for one simple reason. The president has to turn Arizona and win Arizona, or the other states aren't going to matter. Because right now, he's down in Arizona 68,000 votes. Now you might think, well, Mark, that's a pretty big number we got to overturn. It is. However, there's about 450,000 votes outstanding that were legitimate votes prior to election day that have not been counted yet. In the first batch of the recount in Arizona, the president won about 58% of those votes. That's the exact amount that he needs of the remaining votes to win this election in Arizona. So, you know, give it an extra point to be safe. So just do the math. With 450,000 votes outstanding, if the president can win 59 to 60% of those votes, that will be enough for him to overtake the lead that Joe Biden has. And if you can put Arizona into the red camp to where President Trump wins it, now he has a legitimate path to victory. Because he's not going through all this exercise just for the sake of putting up lawsuits in other states. If you look at the count where the president is right now of 214 electoral votes, add in what he would get from Arizona, then we would go to the other states. Georgia, where he currently is down, or he's up 12,000. North Carolina, where he has a sizable lead, and North Carolina of all the states looks like the most secure. Then we go to Pennsylvania, which again is a hot mess right now. You know, President Trump leads by an excess of 112,000 votes, but there's been rampant issues in Pennsylvania. Gary, can you give us a little background? You know, you've been from Pittsburgh. I mean, you know, it's not the epicenter of the problem, which is Philadelphia, but you know Pennsylvania politics pretty well. Can you sort of brief our audience on what you're seeing going on in Pennsylvania and your thoughts on that?
Well, Pennsylvania is pretty much governed by 3 major cities of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania, and Harrisburg, the capital, which is centrally located, and of course Philadelphia, which is the largest city in Pennsylvania. And Philadelphia has always been a hotbed of Democrat politics, so that's where they generally try to get most of their votes. Pittsburgh is a smaller city. Pittsburgh has been losing population over the years. That's one of the reasons why I left there back in the early 1970s. But Pennsylvania is predominantly, at least in western Pennsylvania, is a unionized state. Although Pittsburghers have lost a lot of union jobs because of the steel industry. But Pittsburgh has never been an enclave for Republican politics. So generally, you've got three major cities governing the entire state, where the rural areas, the outlying areas, are generally very conservative. Because we had to remember that there were tens of thousands of people who showed up in Butler, PA, which is north of Pittsburgh. Some had said it was like 50-some thousand people. Well, Butler it's not a close drive to Pittsburgh, but it's outside the Pittsburgh area, and Oil City and Tionesta and other places like that. These are generally very conservative people. So just like New York City and Albany, govern how the election is going to go in New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Harrisburg are going to determine the vote in Pennsylvania.
I've seen in the legal fight, Gary, the Trump administration initially sued in Pennsylvania to have their observers watch the vote count, and apparently they were not able to come into the building. Initially, the appellate courts in Pennsylvania, state appellate courts, approved the Trump administration's campaign's request earlier today to have their representatives go in to watch how these votes are counted, which seems like a fairly reasonable request. And then hours later, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overruled that ruling. And so now we're in a situation where literally Trump campaign personnel on the ground they weren't anywhere near where the votes were being counted. I heard this afternoon late that the Justice Department was considering sending armed personnel in to, obviously to safeguard the building. But it seems like a situation, Gary, where we should be able to have lawyers and taking a look at how these votes are being counted, and to make sure that there's no unscrupulous ballots making it into the vote counting system. Is that something normal for Pennsylvania, to where I know the Democrats on the Supreme Court, I believe they're elected officials, but this seems a rather odd way to run an election, not to have one side's people watch the vote count?
Well, we've got to remember that the government of Pennsylvania, the Attorney General and Secretary of State, they're all Democrats. And look, the Democrats have gotten away with so much in the past 4 years, as everybody knows. And they know that the media will not cover any of the shenanigans that they do. So what they're going to do is they're going to continue to push and push and push until they are pushed back hard. Now, the one thing that President Trump has done in his 4 years is he has pushed back and has given, in my estimation, has given some backbone to the Republicans. And I think this is the case of Lindsey Graham. I think that's why he won, because he really took it to those critics of Brett Kavanaugh during that hearing, and McConnell as well. And so it's all going to come down to the pressure that the Trump administration is going to do, and the DOJ is going to do to force compliance in terms of the law. And look, you got to say another thing about all this. This is why elections matter in terms of judges. It's not just about electing the president of the United States or a governor. It's all the down ballot positions that end up having an effect on an election like this. This is a state-run deal, and Pennsylvania is a corrupt Democrat state, and they're going to try to do what they can in order to get away with it as much as they can. So the Republicans are just going to have to come in here, and the Trump administration is going to have to come in on the ground and force this. Now, one of the things that the Democrats didn't count on was the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is why the Democrats fought so hard against Amy Coney Barrett, because this is probably, in some of these cases, this may end up going to the Supreme Court like it did when George W. Bush won, because of what happened in Florida. So and I firmly believe that the Democrats, this has always been the strategy of the Democrats in this election. They knew which states they were going to get. They knew which ones that the Republicans were probably going to get. If they needed to do any of these states like Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Arizona or Nevada, they always had these illegitimate ballots ready to go. And that's what the issue is on this. Jen Ellis, who's one of Trump's attorney, made that very point today, that they're talking about counting the votes. It's not about counting the votes. It's about counting the legitimate votes. And the question is, what constitutes a legitimate vote today?
Well, Gary, you're spot on that, and that was the whole piece that we talked about on the initial show earlier today. I mean, we're all in favor of counting every legitimate vote, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or non-affiliate party. Every American who's registered to vote has entitled to have their vote count as long as that vote was received by the due date according to state election law. And Gary, what troubles me about the Pennsylvania process is in Pennsylvania, as I understand it, the legislature did not pass that law allowing for 3 extra days to count the votes. That was simply judicial activism from a democratically elected Supreme Court. And twice prior to the election, the case went up to the United States Supreme Court. It was sent back. However, my understanding is the Supreme Court ruled that those ballots could be counted, but they had to be segregated in the event there was a challenge, which later made it back to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court took the position with our esteemed John Roberts casting the 4th and tying vote prior to Amy Coney Barrett going on the court, that because this was a decision by the state Supreme Court on Pennsylvania election law, they allowed it to stay. But the case is still open. So it's my view that, Gary, if there is widespread suspect of voter fraud where ballots, unbeknownst to poll watchers, are being slipped in and counted, that the Trump administration's campaign, they have to get this case in federal court so that it can get back to the Supreme Court, because that just seemed to me like changing state law from the bench. And again, when we all went to bed on election night, I think President Trump's lead was somewhere around 700,000 votes. We understand that some of that vote was going to come in from other areas and that the vote around Philadelphia had not been fully counted. There was a certain amount outstanding. But boy, this is starting to have a certain smell to it, to where as it goes on, and now supposedly 3 days is the maximum time that they're allowed to have this count from Election Day, which would put us to Friday. But it just seems with Trump people not being able to keep an eye on the count, and in some cases, hell, they had to use binoculars the other day. And I know they're getting some relief on that now, but it seems like that, Gary, may need to be the path in Pennsylvania to where we get this in federal court so that the Supreme Court ultimately can determine if some of these ballots that came in after Election Day are legitimate ballots that should be counted. Your thoughts?
Well, this is kind of after the horses have left the barn, but it's amazing to me that we have such erratic and disparate voting policies with all these states. You would think in a national election that the standard should be the same for all the states. I mean, California wants to have illegals to vote. You can have mail-in votes without any real designated person related to the vote. My wife and I voted absentee ballot, and then those are pretty strict in terms of your names are on it, and you've got a barcode on it, and you've got everything related to who you are and so forth. But look, the Democrats they know they can get away with this. They've gotten away with it before. They're going to try it again in this particular election. There won't be any repercussions if there's fraudulent actions being taking place. They've known that this is the way it works. They can get away with this stuff. And unfortunately, the Republicans, they kind of give in and say, well, we don't want to come by as whiners, and we'll get them next time, sort of thing. you know, Trump just needs, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I know there are a lot of lawyers that Trump has, and I know they're working on it behind the scenes. Maybe we're not hearing everything.
Right.
But I'm sure that they're involved in this. But my guess is the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on it. And keep in mind that 3 of the justices of the Supreme Court were involved in the Florida debacle.
That's right.
Amy Coney Barrett was one of the lawyers. I believe John Roberts was one of the lawyers, and Kavanaugh was one of the lawyers.
You're correct. Right. All 3 of them were involved.
Yeah. So you got those who were involved in that. In fact, the question came up to Barrett during the hearings about that, and she says, well, she didn't recall all that. It was so long ago. I think she was only like 25 years old. And this is why I keep trying to get this across to people. A lot of people don't vote, or they're third-party voters, and so forth, or there's not a dime's worth of difference between the parties. There's so much involved in this process when it comes down to something like this. If you don't have your guys in there, your judges in there, and your lawyers in there, you're going to get steamrolled. And the Democrats have steamrolled Republicans for so long, and Republicans just don't seem to know how to win. That hopefully Trump is mad and angry enough at this. He's got his lawyers out there ready to take on the opposition.
Well, and the interesting thing, Gary, is in some of these states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, you actually have Republican state houses and state senates, and in those cases you also have Democratic governors. So a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pieces. The one issue I'm concerned about, again, when we look back at 2000, when we had Bush v. Gore, it was one state, and the votes were generally focused on Palm Beach County, although Broward County was involved in Dade County to a lesser degree. But you had one state. So on our side, we had an army of lawyers led by Jim Baker, who is among the finest lawyers in the country. David Boies had represented the Gore campaign. Here, it seems like we're having to deal with multiple states at the same time. I mean, let me review with you, I'll pull some notes out here again, where we are state by state. We mentioned Arizona earlier in the show, down 68,000 votes. There's been no litigation in the state of Arizona, and rightfully so. Doug Ducey is the governor of Arizona. He's a Republican. They do seem to, even though they're counting him a couple days after the election, there has been no indication of any impropriety in Arizona, no threat of litigation from either the Biden campaign or the Trump campaign. I really believe in Arizona we're just at a point where we have to count the other votes. And again, I have to be critical of what Fox News was thinking the night that, on election night, when you have calling a state that early in the night with that large number of votes outstanding. I mean, I think Fox News really has egg on their face over this one. And I know conservatives across the country are ticked off about this. I mean, Gary, when we get to a point where the mainstream media and the Associated Press call a race, and then they at least have the, whatever you want to call it, the proper scruples, proper judgment to say, hey, wait a minute, we've made an error here, and they actually pulled back, the calls, both ABC News and the Associated Press. And Nate Silver, the Democrats' polling guru of gurus, who missed this election by a mile, Silver came out earlier this morning and said, what are these organizations doing, still calling Arizona, for Biden? Even on CNN, which is the most anti-Trump network throughout the past election season, their commentators were on last night stating there is a real path for Donald Trump to win Arizona. And again, John King and the analyst on CNN stepped back and they went through the process, on Chris Cuomo's show last night. So when you have ABC News pulling it back and you have CNN pulling back, and the Associated Press, again, we criticize them when they're wrong, but let's give them credit when they make a right call. And Gary, in this situation, I think it's critical because with Fox News sitting out there with calling Joe Biden at 264 electoral votes, when Arizona should be taken away, there should not be in the column right now. Nevada is the next state that could put it at 270. Now, as people are well aware, in 2000, when you had the Bush-Gore recall election, George Bush was ahead the entire time. They established the narrative, and it never changed. And ultimately, when it went up to the Supreme Court, since Bush was never behind, although the final vote count ended up being 538 votes, you had momentum, you had the public relations piece on your side. And thank goodness, I guess, for today, I mean, you never want to try to encourage delayed voting, but the state of Nevada came out and said they're going to give until November the 10th to count their votes, and they're not going to announce the results until November the 12th. Now, is that going to stop a media outlet from calling an election? We don't have any control over that. But, I mean, given the situation that we have in Arizona, I mean, Gary, your thoughts on this? I mean, it just seems completely out of line that, you know, Fox News would stick to this position when other media outlets, even NBC and their crew, no one's calling it other than Fox News. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Fox News has it in for Trump. Trump has criticized Fox News repeatedly. I mean, he always criticizes CNN and the rest of them, and that's everybody criticizes them from our perspective. And, you know, you think, well, one network out there, let's have one network out there that it's at least being fair in its analysis of both candidates. And Fox sometimes comes through. I mean, Tucker Carlson is the only one on Fox News that anyone, I think, conservatives listen to. I haven't listened to Fox News for years. And so I think this is spiteful. I think this is designed to get at Trump because Trump came on the early show on Fox News a few days ago. And he ended up blasting Fox News for the way that they were handling the news about him. And yeah. I just think this is plain vindictiveness on Fox News' part.
Yeah, I think you're right, Gary. And, you know, hopefully we get in a situation here where, to use the old saying, the cooler heads prevail. I mean, as data comes back, and again, when Arizona did their first batch of counting votes that came out, it was like, I think it was initially 500,000 that were outstanding, then they counted 50,000. Those 50, the president got almost 60% of those. Now, we're not trying to mislead our audience, say, oh, Trump's got it, can win it, it's in the bag. Far from the truth. But the reason we're emphasizing Arizona so much is Arizona is a must-win state. Because let's say, for example, the president maintains his razor-thin 12,000 vote lead in Georgia right now. And let's say he maintains in North Carolina. And that, I think both Democrats and Republicans, they don't see any projected change in North Carolina because the lead is so big and there's so few votes left to count. Then we come back to Pennsylvania. And if we can survive this fiasco going on in Pennsylvania, well, that would put the president in a position where if he won Arizona, he would be reelected president. So you've heard pundits and commentators all day saying, well, it's a narrow path. It almost reminds you more of 2016. But in this case, it is a really narrow path. He has to win Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania to be elected president. Because if he only wins, maintains his lead in Georgia, North Carolina, and maintains the lead in Pennsylvania, he will still be short if he loses Arizona. And assuming that the lead in Nevada, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, holds up, the final outcome on this vote on the Electoral College would be 270 votes for Joe Biden, 268 votes for President Trump in the closest election in our country's history. And you're saying 270 to 268, that's how the math plays out. And you know, I started thinking about this the other day because in our pre-election show, I had predicted President Trump would be reelected with 280 electoral votes. I thought he would win the Maine special election, which he did. And, you know, I thought based upon what happened in 2016, he still would be able to carry the suburban district around Omaha. Well, that didn't happen. He got beat in that suburban district around Omaha. Even though Nebraska is a red state, that one vote out of Nebraska, now again, Maine and Nebraska are the two states that if you win the state, they cut out 2 districts for some reason. That's how they do it, and it's not a winner-take-all state like the other 48 states in the United States are. So we could literally have a situation where President Trump holds Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, but if he doesn't overcome that vote gap in Arizona, this election will end up being 270 to 268, and Joe Biden will be president. That's what the math turns out to be. And I'm just sitting here shaking my head saying, why did a red state like Nebraska do that? Well, the president won that one vote, Gary, in 2016. But as we saw, he had a weakness among suburban voters, and unfortunately, he lost that one vote. So that, to our audience, that's why it is so important that all these votes in Arizona get counted. So let me just sort of repeat. Arizona, we're down 68,000 votes. There's 450,000 left to be counted. Nevada, we're down 12,000 votes. There's still a lot to be counted. However, there's going to be time because of the extension of the deadline in Nevada. Plus, Gary, the Attorney General of Nevada has indicated that they found some votes of deceased people. They found some votes of people that no longer live in the state that voted. So you have irregularities in Nevada, and you have the former Attorney General in Nevada spearheading Trump's effort there. Georgia, the president's lead now is 12,000 votes, and supposedly they're going to finish that count by tonight, but they've been telling us that for a while. Unfortunately, some of those votes are still tied into the metropolitan areas, which went overwhelmingly for Biden. So too tight to call on Georgia. We've talked about Pennsylvania, 108,000 current President Trump vote lead. That's down dramatically from the 700,000 it was when we went to bed on election night. However, again, that's with like 88% of the vote counted. So there's other votes that have to come in. North Carolina, the president's up by a seemingly insurmountable 78,000 votes. I feel highly confident that that's going to hold up, as is the Senate race. Tom Tillis has already declared victory, and most Democratic senators have already written it off. Wisconsin's another one where there was oddities in the election. I know Wisconsin has a high percentage of people that vote, but the turnout was a record 89.4%. I mean, that's off the charts type voter participation. So there's been some improprieties in Wisconsin. The president has asked for a recount, as he's rightfully entitled to do. Will that change? We don't know. And then in Michigan, again, we all went to bed on election night with Trump ahead and John James ahead in the Senate race. But as the votes have continued to come in, that lead evaporated, and now outlets have called Michigan for the president. Oddity of oddities in Michigan, though, around the Detroit area, we've seen a couple instances where people 118 and 120 years old voted. Now, obviously, they were deceased years ago, but you have certain improprieties in Michigan. So, when you add it all up, I mean, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 states that the president is going to have to deal with here. So, Gary, that's a pretty tall task, but I think the president and his legal team are up to the task. I mean, your thoughts on this is we have to really deal with 7 states at this point in the game.
Well, I think you're right. Of course, as everything is focused on Arizona, because if that one goes, that is the end of it. But even that could be contested, and I think my guess is this is good. I don't know how long this can go on. I mean, the 2000 election, Bush v. Gore, and I don't know how. I mean, that took it down to the wire as well. I mean, we're looking at essentially 2 months until inauguration. The Democrats are already scheming and putting things together as to what they're going to do. So, yeah, the Republicans need to be on the ball and looking at all the legal ramifications of what's taking place. It's just such a mess. Here we are, first world country, probably the greatest country in the United States, and here we're still can't even figure out who won the election. I mean, years ago, it used to be, hey, you woke up in the morning, you knew who was elected, and that was it. This is just crazy. Here in Georgia, they changed the way you vote. I think they went with a complete electronic voting, and so everything that they're doing at the moment must be done with must be because of mailed-in ballots and absentee ballots. And when the funny thing is, when we first moved to Georgia, this was a predominantly Democrat state, and then over the years it became Republican, and now it's kind of gone back to the Democrat because so many people from out of state have moved to Georgia, and many of them from Hollywood because it's amazing how many films and TV programs are done here in Georgia, and it has changed the demographics. I live in Cobb County, which was one of the most conservative counties in the state of Georgia. West Cobb, where I live, is still pretty conservative, but East Cobb has flipped, to liberal Democrat policies. So I mean, there's a lot going on here, and not only this particular election, but we've got 2 years is going to be right around the corner, and then 4 years right after that. And the demographics are shifting, and we better get on the ball with all this. And I don't even know who the Republicans who could put up again in 4 years if Trump wins. I don't know what will happen with it if Trump loses. Trump might say, "Look, I'm going to come back in 4 years, and I'm going to spend my 4 years, gearing up to take back this country." So there's a lot of work to do, not only on the legal side of things, but just on the practical planning side of things and what's going to come next.
Gary, one thing, and again, we've talked about the states, so we're going to sort of shift a little bit here on the show. Boy, the pollsters really blew it. I mean, again, we had a situation, and I talked about this on prior to the Schaftlein Report show when we were doing up to our election coverage. We were relying on 3 pollsters predominantly in doing our analysis. We relied on Scott Rasmussen, the Trafalgar Group, and Susquehanna. Well, guess what? The 3 pollsters that we relied on, they nailed the election results pretty much to a T. You heard those polls from NBC News, ABC, CNN. They were so far off, and we kept telling our viewers time and time again, these polls have no semblance of all of what's going to happen. I mean, we talked about the hidden Trump vote. How wasn't the hidden Trump vote? These pollsters were just flat out wrong. They not only missed the hidden Trump voter, but one thing the president did, Gary, he expanded the Republican base. Hispanics, the president got, it's still not finalized yet, but somewhere 32 to 33% of the Hispanic vote, which was up from the 2016 election. African American vote came in between 12 and 13%. And among African American men, he got almost 20%. He was like 18% and change. People talked about the women's vote, how Trump was going to collapse that. Trump actually picked up 2 percentage points of the women's vote compared to where he was in 2016. So I was sitting here hearing all these statistics, and I'm saying, well, wait a minute. He gained among African Americans. And again, prior to the election, we had predicted that Trump might get 15, 16%. Well, we were a little bit short of that. I think if he had achieved 15% of African American vote, he may have won the election without all this garbage we're having to go through. But I kept saying, okay, he gained among African Americans, he gained among Hispanics, he gained among Asian Americans. He was up to 34% among Asian Americans. And he gained among women 2 points. I'm saying, where did he lose? Shockingly, white men. Yes, Gary, that's exactly right. And I'm saying white men, 4% less among white men ended up defecting and going for Joe Biden. I'm still scratching my head at that one, trying to figure that out. What are your thoughts? I mean, what happened where we gained in areas that we wanted to gain, but we somehow lost 4% of white men? Any thoughts on how that happened?
Did they vote for Biden, or did they just not vote?
No, those were actual Biden votes. I mean, we actually lost, in the actual vote totals, 4% less votes than President Trump won among white men in the 2016 election. So that was
it's a mystery to me, other than the fact that maybe some of the some of the women, they were married to liberal women, and the women forced them to vote for Biden, or they would cut off certain privileges to them. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a mystery to me why white men would have gone for Biden a 4% increase. It's just, I don't understand that at all.
I think we're going to have to do a little more research in that. Listen, if you feel as passionate about what's happened this election as we do on these votes, there's a web page, recountthevote.com. That's www.recountthevote.com. Before this was just launched earlier today by friends of the show in Atlanta, and within hours there was already 24,000 people involved in this site. It's growing rapidly by the minute. And if you care about the results of this election, and you care about politics, you care about the country, and you care about having a free and fair election where all votes of legitimate voters are counted and not these fraudulent ballots that appear to be showing up, go to www.recountthevote.com. That website will supply you lots of information, and you can keep up on what's really happening with the recount effort. Gary, let's move on. We were talking about these pollsters getting it wrong. I have the belief that like ABC, NBC, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post, I've said it time and time again, those were not polls designed to reflect public opinion, but they were designed to deal with getting Trump voters not to vote. It was trying to influence public opinion, and I think they failed miserably. I don't think anyone in the Democratic media complex thought that Republicans were going to come out and vote at the level that they did. I mean, you think about it, we had the mainstream media against us. We had big tech against us. You know, you had all the Democrats, the never Trumpers, everyone in the media coverage was 94% negative on the president, and yet Republicans didn't buy all that garbage of the polls. They came out in droves and supported the president. The president actually, let's give credit. Joe Biden got the most votes of any presidential candidate ever. President Trump, he increased his vote count significantly from where it was 4 years ago. Your thoughts on how the Republican voters reacted in the face of just crazy polls, which were completely wrong again.
Well, again, I just think you're right. I think people were fed up with Biden and what the Democrats were going to do. And if the media had, in fact, just been played fair 50-50 between the two candidates, I think you would have seen a landslide with Trump winning. I think that the Democrats, some of them are saying it, are a little depressed that they didn't take back or take more of the House.
Yeah.
The fact they lost, I don't know how many seats they've lost in the House. I don't know if it was 15 seats or not. Republican women won, and here supposedly the Republicans are anti-women, and yet there were many Republican women who won and who were actually pro-life. So I mean, all of this is rather staggering. But I think the Democrats turned their people out, and I've said this as well. When you compared the enthusiasm for Trump, and people said, well, there wasn't the enthusiasm for Biden. That's absolutely correct. But what was enthusiastic about the Democrats is that they wanted to beat Trump. And one of the ways to do that was to go out and vote. And they didn't care. They don't like Biden. They don't think he's going to be a good candidate. He's probably not even going to be in there. But what they are after is the ideology that is going to be represented by the radical side of the Democrat Party. So they voted ideology, and they voted anti-Trump ideology. And this is where we are in the country today. I mean, hey, Republicans turned out to vote. We're just going to have to really see how many of those Democrat votes are actually legitimate votes, and maybe it'll bring down Biden's overall total. But when you go to California, what is it? California voted for Biden. Was it 8? Did he get 8 million votes in California?
Yeah, they're still counting the votes here in California, but it was a large number. But there is some good news. I mean, we've talked a lot of the show about the presidential race. Let's drill down and talk about some good news for the Republicans that happened, particularly in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives. Boy, Lindsey Graham's race in South Carolina, 140 million spent against him to lose by 14 points. Mitch McConnell's race in Kentucky, $90 million poured into it by liberal Democrats, coastal elites in New York and California, only to lose by 20 points. We had races that were supposed to flip the other way. Tom Tillis in North Carolina ended up beating Cunningham. It hasn't been officially called yet, but it will be when the absentee votes come in. So that was one that Schumer and the Democrats were counting on. Steve Daines in Montana running against Bullock, the former governor. Daines maintained his seat. Joni Ernst in Iowa. Again, mainstream media was trying to tell you up until the election this was a tight race. The Des Moines Register poll comes out, says that Joni Ernst is up by 7 a couple days before the election. Lo and behold, she wins about 8 points. So, Gary, we did have a lot of bright spots there. We had a situation where Susan Collins, among a media onslaught, Susan Collins.
That was a shocker to me. She was a shocker. And I have to say Lindsey Graham was a shocker to me as well.
Yeah, I didn't have a good feel because polling's so weak in South Carolina, but I started thinking, now, wait a minute now. The media's trying to tell us a state that Trump won by 15 points, that Lindsey Graham's going to lose that race? And I'm saying there is no way that Trump's going to win a state by 12 to 15 points and Lindsey Graham's going to, what are people going to do? Vote for Trump and vote for the Democrat? I'm like, I never bought into that stuff. But I will share this with you, Gary. I was concerned because, a lot of politics is about money. And when you that guy raised $140 million. That's an astounding number. But needless to say, Lindsey came through, Mitch came through as expected. We won a lot of tight races, from Montana, Iowa, Susan Collins in Maine, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, and then right now we've got 48 with the addition of Alaska. That'll be called Republican the next day or two, plus Tom Tillis once the absentee ballots. That'll give us 50. The Democrats will have 48. Now, in your home state, David Perdue, he's at like 50.1% right now, and there's still votes to count. So, Gary, as I understand Georgia law, you have to be at 50% of the total votes cast, or there'll be a runoff election on January 5th. And I know that Kelly Loeffler, Senator Loeffler, is already in that because her race was so jumbled. How they had like 20 candidates in it, including Doug Collins, who I think made he made a run for a seat that I wish Doug Collins had stayed in the House and not done that. We might now have Kelly in the Senate. But needless to say, it does appear, Gary, we're either going to have 1 or 2 runoffs in Georgia on January 5th. You're a Georgia resident. I would think that we would be favored in both those runoffs. What are your thoughts on the potential for 1 and definitely 1 and maybe 2 runoffs in the state of Georgia?
Well, typically in Georgia, when there's a runoff, the Republicans win. Yeah. I don't know why that happens, but that's generally the way it's been. I know the one candidate that's going up against Loeffler. I think I don't know if he's black, and of course there's a large black vote in the state of Georgia. We got Stacey Abrams, of course, who ran against Brian Kemp, and has been complaining about that she's really the real governor. The race was taken away from her. So my guess is the Democrats are going to be in full force trying to at least topple one of them. I think Perdue may be pretty safe with Ossoff, but again, Georgia has changed. I mean, it again went from Democrat to Republican back to 50-50, and that's been worrisome for my wife and me because there's really no other place where we can go, unfortunately. But that's where we are. So those two, one of those races was really there. It was a special election.
Right.
So 2 of them really shouldn't have been running at the same time. A lot of people don't know this, but not all the senators run every 6 years. It's a third, and a third every
That's
2
right.
years.
That's right.
But we got stuck with 2 elections because one of them was a special election because Johnny Isaacson had retired early.
That's right. That was the Kelly Loeffler Collins race, I believe. Right, Gary? That was the special election one. I think that's what it was. They
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Brian Kemp really upset a lot of people by putting Kelly Loeffler in to take Isaacson's place until an election could take place, because she was kind of an unknown, multi-millionaire.
Right.
And her past voting record was not that. Voting record, just views were not that great. She owned a WNBA basketball team and the homosexual issue and so forth. But I have to say, and I wasn't real happy with it either.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted Collins in rather than her. But I have to say, she has stuck by Trump 100%.
Yes.
She hasn't wavered a bit, and we don't see any break in her voting record. So. Collins has come out and said, look, he's supporting her, so we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well, that's great news. I'm glad Collins is supporting her, because it's critical that she maintain that seat. And again, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both rock solid conservatives. And I tend to agree with you also. I mean, Republicans tend to win special elections in Georgia. Kelly Loeffler is running against, I believe the man's the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. So I would expect, and you're hearing this from Democrats too. So again, it would appear that Kelly Loeffler will be favored to win, and hopefully David Perdue can avoid it. I mean, he's right on the cusp of 50%, but he's also preparing for if he's below 50. So let's tell our audience this. This is really important that we win 1 or 2 of those seats, and I think we'll win both of them. But if we win both of them, that would give the Senate 52 to 48 Republican over Democrat. Why is that important? It's because any garbage legislation that would come over from Pelosi and the liberal Democrats in the House, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, would go nowhere in the Senate, because Mitch McConnell controls the agenda about what comes onto the Senate floor. So as long as we win 1 or both of those seats, again, if we won 1 and lost 1, we'd be at a 51-49 advantage in the Senate. But it's likely if you're going to win 1, you're probably going to win them both. And bear in mind, these are both sitting United States senators, and it's unusual for a sitting senator to get beat, period. But as Gary mentioned, with some of the changes that have gone on in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia, you don't want to take anything for granted. But the good news is, and Democrats recognize this too, they really, if the election held up and Vice President Biden did win, then you would have Biden in the White House, you would have a Mitch McConnell-led Senate 52 to 48, and then Gary, let's talk for a little bit about what happened in the House. You know, the expectations pre-election by the media and the Democrats were that Democrats were likely to pick up 5 to 10 seats. Well, why were they saying that? Because they believed their own Nate Silver, ABC, CBS, NBC polls. That's what happened. And what was the actual outcome? Not one Republican House member who ran for election lost. Every sitting House Republican won, and we ended up flipping. The final number is going to be somewhere, it looks like, Gary, anywhere from 11 to 15 seats. And that dramatically reduces the influence of the far left wing of the Democratic Party, because now if you take how much the Republicans, and Kevin McCarthy's just smiling from ear to ear. McCarthy's the House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy. Now with an extra 11 to 15 seats, all of a sudden the dynamics of the House change to where you're going to have some moderate Democrats that will side with Republicans, and all the, last time almost every Democrat in everything they did in the House, they vote lock, stock, and barrel with Pelosi. Well, because they voted with Pelosi and she had so many of those far left-wing radical proposals, they passed in the House, went to the Senate, and they died in Mitch McConnell's wastebasket. Well, 11 to 15 of those Democrats lost races. So when the final count is up, it looks like our position in the House, Gary, has been greatly strengthened. And here in California is a good example. In the 2018 midterms, we here in Orange County, where we're broadcasting from, we actually we lost every seat in Orange County. Orange County used to be a bedrock Republican community, but again, because of changing demographics, et cetera, and what happened in the midterms, we lost every one of those seats. Now, it appears that we have two people, Michelle Steele, that represents south part of Orange County, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach area, Young Kim, that represents the area where we're broadcasting from. They appear to be in a situation where those seats can be flipped back to Republican. So at the end of the day, Gary, we're going to have a situation, excluding the presidential race. We've set that aside because, we talked about that for 35 minutes in the show, and we've pretty well dissected that. But on the senatorial and the House of Representatives, holding the Senate and making significant gains in the House, Gary, you got to call that a major victory. And even Democrats are starting to do the self-loathing and, self-emulation, saying, what the heck happened to us? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right. I think what probably a lot of these Democrat representatives are looking at this and say, look, I'm kind of in a purple state. I didn't win by much this last election, and if I go far left, I'm going to probably lose in 2022. And so there might be some moderation in terms of a lot of these Democrats to hold the line, which may keep the squad in check. They may not want to go with and be associated with AOC and her band of merry radicals.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important thing. And then the other thing is that there's some grumbling about Nancy Pelosi herself about, hey, maybe it's time for her to go, because she is the one that really didn't stand up to the radical nature of their policies. And so it may be time for new blood, and so she needs to get out of the way because I think she completely mismanaged and misrepresented what was going to happen in the election.
Gary, I could not agree with you more. Do I think she's going to be replaced? Again, we're not experts on Democrat politics, but she clearly blew it in this election, and what they represented, just didn't even come close. And have you noticed, the past few days the stock market has really rallied? Well, why is one of the reasons that happening is because people are now realizing that Biden's promise to raise taxes is not likely to come about, or at least to the level he talked about. And the probability of capital gains taxes staying about where they are is greater now because of the Republican likely control of the Senate and the inability to pass these radical left-wing ideas. Effectively, Gary, this packing the court, statehood for D.C., statehood Puerto Rico, Green New Deal, all this crap that these far left-wing radicals in the House were talking about trying to jam through, that's dead. I think the biggest losers on election night were the far left-wing radicals in the Democratic House of Representatives. And equally as important, the losses in the Senate, to where that Republicans will likely, assuming we win at least one of the Georgia Senate races, maintain control of the Senate. So a lot of that bad legislation that they talked about doing, that's going to be out the window now. And Gary, one other thing that I noticed, a lot of statehoods, meaning the state houses and the state senates, Republicans actually gained in those. So setting aside the presidential election, I know that takes up all the oxygen, but on a state level of state houses and state senates, the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate, overall, Gary, not a bad, actually a very, very good night for Republicans.
Yeah, and of course the cherry on top of the ice cream and the whipped cream would be great if Trump could pull this thing out and steamroll the Democrats with just hammering them over their corruption, because I don't know what's going to happen with Durham and Barr on the things that they've been investigating. I know they kind of held off until after the election, so not to appear like they were being political in their investigations. So we're going to have to wait to see. We could revamp the FBI and the CIA. We could get rid of Fauci. There's so many good things that could happen if Trump is elected. But you're right. I think the brakes have been put on the radicalization of the Democrat Party, at least for probably 2 years. Of course, we don't know if Biden wins, how long he'll be able to last, and what'll happen happen next with Kamala Harris becoming a president, and which is just a nightmare just to think about it. This is the most unprecedented election year in the history of the United States.
Yep.
These things were none of this could have been predicted with the COVID virus, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Democrats lamenting that why didn't she retire during Obama's administration. You know, she was probably hoping, because it was a foregone conclusion based upon the polls in 2016, that Hillary was going to win, and that she didn't win. And as a result, she had to hold off for another 4 years and just didn't make it. I mean, who could have imagined that 2 years before the 2020 election that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would die?
Yeah.
It's really something of an election year, to be sure.
Well, it's been something else. And, you know, I mean, here's the thing, Gary. We're in a very changing situation here. A lot can happen. We're going to be back with you guys we're going to come in tomorrow. We're going to give you some analysis tomorrow. And then next week, we're going to be here Monday through Thursday and giving you updates. And with all what's happening, I don't see, Gary, any end to this. The media may call this early, but with all the improprieties going on in these multiple states, I don't think, despite the fact the media is itching to call Joe Biden president-elect, I don't think it's going to be official for a while. I think these lawsuits will continue as long as there's valid issues that are still pending, that we have to have it to where all votes are fairly counted and the credibility of the American election is not in question. And I think whether you're Democrat, Republican, whatever affiliation, you want all votes counted, but you want them to be legitimate votes counted. And we're going to be keeping you constantly updated. Gary, I really want to thank you for being my guest on this initial show. It's been such a privilege having you on, and I want to invite you back, and hopefully you'll become a frequent guest on our show. Your comments were invaluable today. I really appreciate your insight and your analysis. And again, my thanks for joining us on the initial show. Again, to our audience.
Thanks for having me, and I really did enjoy it. I hope to be able to do this again, and eventually to actually meet you. So hopefully we'll be able to get together soon.
Oh, you certainly will. And again, for our audience, for those of you who are concerned about the vote, www.recountthevote.com. Make your feelings heard. And again, thank you for being with us today. We wish you the best. We'll be with you tomorrow with the latest updates on everything that's happened. Stay safe, stay focused on the news, and we're still in the fight, and let's pull him through in Arizona, and let's stand behind the president, and hopefully we can eke out the most improbable victory of all time. Thank you.